You can close those machzarim for a few minutes. I imagine you've heard of the Wright brothers. Good. Have you heard? We've had a popping noise going on for our last service, so I might have to switch microphones. I'm just warning you if it continues. Bear with me. So you've heard of the Wright brothers, but have you heard of a man named Samuel Pierpont Langley? I wouldn't expect that you had. You see, it was the early 20th century, and world leaders around the globe. Sorry, they're switching. There we go. Can you hear me? It's that Rabbi Green theme, living in a world of not knowing. You hit it, Rabbi Green. Maybe I should skip this sermon and we'll just stick with your message from last night. Whew. It was the early 20th century, and world leaders around the globe were in the early phases of what would eventually evolve to be the space race, with the hopes that their respective nation would be the first to create what we now call the airplane. In the United States, there was one clear person for the job: Samuel Pierpont Langley, one of, if not the most renowned astrophysicist in the country at the time. The Department of Defense contributed $50,000 for the effort, and the Smithsonian Institute, of which Pierpont Langley was the chair, contributed another $20,000. Truly an astronomical sum for the time. Langley and his team spent countless hours in their physics lab, primarily focused on the concept of propulsion. And ultimately, to the thrill of the government, the press, and really everyone in the country at the time, Langley and his team revealed their creation. They called it the Great Aerodrome. And on its inaugural launch day, the Great Aerodrome was catapulted into the air over the Potomac River from a houseboat upon which Langley was seated. Everyone watched with incredible anticipation. They observed the unmanned Great Aerodrome jettison upwards, float forwards for a few seconds, only to plummet into the river. It was a spectacular failure. Now, unbeknownst to everyone at the time, there were two brothers who owned a bicycle store in Dayton, Ohio, named Orville and Wilbur Wright. And they were interested in the idea of manned flight. With only $2,000 of their own funds and physics knowledge limited to their understanding of bicycles, the Wright brothers went to work, designing and building their own creation. From their bicycle knowledge, Orville and Wilbur had a sense that rather than propulsion, the real key to manned flight was going to be balance and equilibrium. So they focused their attention there, not on the propeller, but on the wings. And then, after the production of many prototypes, which were always flown personally by one brother or the other, Orville and Wilbur ultimately created what came to be known as the Wright Flyer. And on December 17, 1903, the Wright brothers became the first in history to successfully launch a sustained, powered, and pilot-driven air machine into flight. For the Wright brothers, it turns out that their conscious choice of focusing on the right problems, balance and equilibrium, in the right way, by being on the plane, led to their success. In stark contrast to Langley's focus on the wrong problem, propulsion, from a distance. He never even got on the plane. I've been thinking a lot about this idea. When faced with a multifaceted situation, how do we discern where our primary focus should be? How do we decide where to invest ourselves and our energies? And I'd like to invite us to consider these questions together today as a Jewish people, this first day of the Jewish New Year, because I believe we, members of the Jewish community, are at a crossroads that is tempting us to direct the majority of our focus towards the wrong problem rather than the right one. Anti-Semitism is undoubtedly the most significant concern of and for the Jewish community today. You are surely aware of the precipitous increase in outward anti-Semitic incidents across our country and across our world, whether from the far right or the far left, online, at cocktail parties, in the halls of our government, the streets of our towns. In fact, the acclaimed Sapir Journal, a quarterly journal of ideas for a thriving Jewish future, as it's self-titled, dedicated the entirety of its recent issue to anti-Semitism. Filled with thought-provoking articles from a diverse swath of today's top Jewish thinkers, the article that stood out to me was the one that was written by Sapir's editor, Bret Stephens, with whom you may be familiar. He entitled his piece, "3 Falsehoods About Anti-Semitism and 1 Truth." In his first 3 points, Stephen notes a few key observations about anti-Semitism. First, that anti-Semitism is a concrete conspiracy theory, or a set of them, that despite being ridiculous, are still real ideas in the world and therefore need to be taken seriously. Second, Stevens highlights that anti-Semitism stems from feelings of envy and inferiority, where Jews are unjustly portrayed as superior. And he differentiates this from other forms of bigotry, which typically see their subjects as inherently inferior. And third, he asserts that alone, education about anti-Semitism cannot eradicate the problem of anti-Semitism. Each one a really important understanding. But it is Stephen's final point about anti-Semitism that proves the most noteworthy to me. Anti-Semitism, he says, is not the Jewish people's problem. And it's not on us, the Jews, to solve it. As Stevens writes, the real question for us then isn't how to solve anti-Semitism, it's how to thrive in the face of it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that we, the Jewish community, ignore anti-Semitism. We have to do our part to normalize the stigmatization of anti-Semitism. And of course, we have to continue to invest in our security. This terribly sad reflection of the reality of our time is something we, the Jewish community, cannot afford not to pay. But we Jews and Jewish families will not be the ones to solve anti-Semitism if it can be solved at all. Anti-Semitism does not belong to us. Do you know what does belong to us? Judaism. But unfortunately, many of us have come to conflate these two ideas. Consider that the latest Pew survey of the American Jewish population reveals that we Jews care most about remembering the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, in stark contrast to the percentages of people who identify outwardly as Jewish through things like synagogue affiliation, Jewish charitable giving, tzedakah, observance of Jewish rituals or Jewish practice, all of these being reported at all-time lows. In other words, what binds the Jewish community together today is not our shared tradition, but our upset at others' hatred towards us. Just like Samuel Pierpont Langley, who focused on the wrong problem, even though it seemed like the right one, we, the Jewish collective, are being drawn into that same mistake. With all our attention on the external forces that loom, we risk ignoring the part that really matters and over which we actually do have control. How we will keep Judaism not just alive, but vibrant, thriving, for now and for the future. Perhaps you have heard me share this common occurrence when we clergy meet with B'nai Mitzvah families. Perhaps you have been a part of this common occurrence. At some point along the preparation process, the student will inevitably turn to the parent with them and say, "I don't want to do this." Do you want to confess to this now? Okay. To which the parent will respond, "Oh, you are doing this." To which the child then likely retorts, "But why? Why do I have to do this? Why does it matter?" Because it does. It just does. This exchange, if you've been there or you can imagine, tends to leave parents frustrated that their children just don't get it. And it leaves children frustrated that their parents seem unable to explain why they care. It's not that people don't care. They do. According to every Jewish population study, the percentages of people who say they feel proud to be Jewish, those are higher than ever. The issue is, we don't talk about it. We don't have language for it. Or we have the language and we're not comfortable with it. And then either way, we don't often have the actions to support our sentiments. In truth, many of us who identify as Reformed Jews may find ourselves more comfortable sharing the kind of Jews we are not, the kind of Jewish things we do not do, rather than the kind of Jews we are and the Jewish things we choose to do. Like, I'm Jewish, but I don't go to synagogue. I'm Jewish, but I don't keep kosher. I'm Jewish, but I'm not religious. These narratives, they do nothing more than keep us at a distance from so much that is rightly ours, our inheritance, our tradition, our personal invitation for belonging and purpose. What if we defined religious Jews as those who choose to use the majesty of our Jewish tradition to live a more moral and meaningful existence? Why would any of us who claim Judaism for ourselves want to distance ourselves from that? Why do we care about Judaism? Why are we proud to be Jewish? And how then do we make that real, shared in our world? Because Judaism can be personal, but it is not private. There is nothing else of significance in our lives we would leave pent up in our hearts, as if the personal conviction relieves us of the responsibility to do something about it in the world. Have you ever heard someone say to their kid, "Your dance recital or hockey game is important to me in my heart, but I won't be telling you why. And I won't be going to the show or the tournament"? Of course not. But friends, we do this with Judaism all the time. If we're going to suggest that Judaism is something about which we care, whose practices give us meaning, then we've got to be able to say why it matters, and we need to show it and show up for it. Remember the Wright brothers and their practical, hands-on approach to the airplane in contrast to Langley's theoretical view? We need to take our cue from the Wright brothers in a practical and practiced relationship with our Judaism, rather than keeping it just at principle, at arm's length. Consider this story. In an attempt to usurp Moses' leadership position, a power-seeking man named Korach asks Moses a trick question. Does a house full of holy books still require a mezuzah on the door? Moses answers, yes, it's still required. Korach laughs cynically, and he comments that the tiny mezuzah only contains the Shema, a small excerpt from Torah, but a house filled with holy books, this contains the entire Torah, plus so much more. Essentially, Korach believes that the inside is the only part that matters. But Moses asserts the value of both. Can you guess who was right, who the winner was? Not so different from Wright and Samuel Pierpont Langley. Moses is our household name, thankfully. Korach doesn't really make it into our books much afterwards. Here's the truth. Judaism at its heart is internal and external. It is an inside and an outside practice. There is a place for the internal and for the self. But at the end of the day, all the self-care and me time in the world won't bring us the deeper fulfillment for which each of us so deeply yearns as humans. To attain that, we have to be a part of something bigger. We have to be in service of a purpose outside of ourselves. Being of service in this way is never a privatized endeavor. Rather, it beckons us to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary, to bring more healing and wholeness, to create more justice, more hope, more love, more peace, each and every component of which is a particular Jewish goal. Here's my Jewish why. Not Rabbi Geffen's hardcore Jewish why, but my Jewish why. Judaism matters to me because my heart races faster with the electric pulse of Jewish wisdom and Jewish practice. Whether I'm studying the Talmud or building my sukkah, those acts connect me as a link in the chain with the generations of old and those yet to be. And this enables me to see myself as a stakeholder of a particular practice that calls me, Wendi, to do my part to heal the sick, clothe the naked, help the poor, pursue peace, love my neighbor and the stranger, to animate the divine in all people, so that together as a Jewish people, we can transform the world from the way it is to the way our tradition tells us it can yet be. What if on this first day of this Jewish New Year, we asked ourselves, what is my particular Jewish why? Why does Judaism matter to me? And then we made that Jewish New Year's resolution to commit ourselves to making our Jewish whys manifest outwardly in our lives. When families receive their child's B'nai Mitzvah date in the 4th grade, we invite them to pick one particular aspect of Judaism to which they want to commit, to make their own, and do with regularity. It's an invitation for each of us, for all of us, in particular, this first day of Rosh Hashanah. Maybe it's lighting Shabbat candles, or baking challah, or coming to services regularly, or volunteering with our Feed the Homeless program, or giving tzedakah, or deciding to join the oldest running weekly book club. Jeff Echt will be there, just to mention a few options. And as we actually do so, we speak about our Jewish whys and connect them to those actions. For example, one could say, when I light Shabbat candles each week, it allows me to remember the sources of light in my life. And that enables me not to only feel grateful on a Friday night, but to be more grateful every day of the week. Or when I volunteer once a month with Feed the Homeless, I take seriously the Jewish commandment that no one needs to be hungry. And I'm doing my part to make that Jewish ideal real in the world. Doing this enables us not only to build a shared Jewish vocabulary, but also a shared Jewish experience that is uniquely our own, not just theory, but one that belongs to us and to which we belong in return, regardless of what anyone on the outside thinks or believes. That is Jewish thriving. Interestingly, a focus on Jewish thriving strengthens and bolsters the active place of Judaism in the world and our own sense of who we are. And ultimately, that is what real, abiding security is actually about. If we know who we are, we cannot be shaken. In the words of Stevens at the end of his article, we are still here, better and stronger than ever. Well, that is always a fine reply to anti-Semitism. Turns out when we really want to thrive, focusing our energies on matters of sustained flight ultimately addresses the matter of propulsion too. Or put more simply, when we make our particular Jewish identity manifest in a way that includes both word and deed, well, that's what gives us wings. And with our priorities in the right place, up close, personally invested, on the plane, that's when we can truly soar. Shabbat Shalom. Shana Tova.